Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into the past, specifically the period between 1450 and 1750.
A pivotal time. We've got some fascinating source materials here.
Yeah, excerpts looking at, maritime empires, economic strategies, global trade, social upheaval, even shifting beliefs.
A lot to unpack.
Definitely. And our mission today is really to understand how economic thinking, how those strategies drove empire building.
And how they fundamentally reshaped global connections.
Mhm.
It's about getting a clearer picture of that whole era.
Exactly. This period saw European powers really stretch their influence, didn't it, based on these new economic ideas?
Oh, absolutely. They forged these new networks across oceans and,
Hmm.
well, the groundwork for a lot of modern global dynamics was laid right then.
Okay, let's jump straight into the economics then. That seems like the engine. Our sources point heavily towards mercantilism.
Right. Mercantilism was the dominant idea. It wasn't just about land, it was about wealth. Specifically, gold and silver, hard cash.
So the goal for each nation was just to accumulate as much shiny metal as possible.
Pretty much. The thinking was there's a finite amount of wealth in the world, kind of like a pie.
Ah, the fixed pie idea. So if one nation gets a bigger slice,
Another nation gets a smaller one. It was inherently competitive. Zero sum.
and that meant pushing exports over imports, right, to get that net inflow of gold and silver.
Exactly. A favorable balance of trade.
Yeah.
Sell more, buy less. That was the mantra.
And this drive for wealth, for a bigger piece of that pie, directly fueled building empires. How did that connection work?
Quote, colonies were crucial. They served as guaranteed markets for the home country's goods.
Captive markets. So you force your colonies to buy your stuff?
Basically, yes.
Oh.
And they also provided raw materials, often cheaply. So more colonies meant more guaranteed sales, more resources, and ultimately more gold flowing back home.
It creates this really powerful feedback loop then. Mercantilism encourages getting colonies, and colonies reinforce the mercantilist goals.
Precisely. A strong incentive to go out and, well, claim territory.
Now, running alongside this state-driven mercantilism, the sources talk a lot about joint stock companies. These weren't state entities, were they?
No, not directly. They were private enterprises, but, crucially, often supported by the state. It was a brilliant innovation for the time.
How so? What made them so effective?
They allowed lots of private individuals to pool their money to fund these huge, risky ventures. Voyages, trading posts.
Things an individual merchant probably couldn't afford alone.
Exactly. And the really key part was limited liability.
Meaning investors weren't personally ruined if the whole thing went belly up.
Right. Your personal assets were mostly protected. That lowered the barrier to entry for investment significantly.
Okay, so you get private capital flowing into these big ventures. Where does the state come in?
The state would grant them charters. These were official documents, essentially giving the company a monopoly on trade in a specific region.
Ah, so like an exclusive license. You get the trade rights for, say, the Indian Ocean, and nobody else from your country can compete there.
Correct. Yeah. It created this sort of partnership. The state gets expansion and resources, often without footing the whole bill.
And the investors get a shot at huge profits protected by that monopoly. A win-win, in a way.
A win-win for the state and the investors. Certainly. It was a powerful engine for expansion. Think about the strategic advantage, too.
How so?
For the state, these companies were like extensions of their power, establishing footholds, projecting influence, but without the direct cost of, say, sending the Navy initially.
A lighter footprint, maybe, at first, anyway.
Sort of. And for the merchants, that state charter gave them legitimacy and muscle. Less competition, more security.
The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, seems like the classic example here. Chartered in 1602.
Yeah, the VOC is textbook. They got a monopoly for the Indian Ocean trade, made fortunes for their investors.
And massively expanded Dutch influence in Asia.
Hugely, to the point where they were fighting wars over it, like the Anglo-Dutch Wars. That was pure economic and imperial competition, fueled by these companies.
And it's interesting, the sources seem to suggest that Spain and Portugal, who relied more on direct state funding,
Right, the older model, perhaps.
they started to lose ground relatively during this period.
It does seem that way. The joint stock model, that blend of private capital and state backing, just seemed more dynamic, more effective in that competitive environment. It gave nations like the Dutch and the English an edge.
Okay, so economics and these company structures are driving the expansion. Let's shift focus to the trade networks themselves. What actually changed on the global stage and what maybe stayed the same?
That's a great point, because it wasn't a complete European takeover of all trade.
Oh,
Well, despite European ships becoming much more dominant in, say, the Indian Ocean,
yeah.
those existing regional markets in Afro-Eurasia, they kept humming along.
So local merchants in India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, they were still active.
Very much so. In fact, some sources suggest they even benefited from the overall increase in trade traffic, even if Europeans were controlling the long-haul routes more.
That's important. It wasn't just Europeans replacing everyone else.
No. And you also had the major land routes, like the Silk Roads, still operating, controlled by powerful Asian empires like Ming and later King China. Land-based trade didn't just disappear.
And what about the producers, the farmers, the artisans?
For many, life continued, but often intensified. The growing global demand meant more pressure to produce. Think about cotton farmers in South Asia, or weavers making silks and rugs.
More demand could mean more work, obviously. Did it ever mean better living standards?
Potentially, yes. For some, increased production and trade could lead to, a bit more prosperity, but it definitely meant more labor.
So strong continuities there. But the big change, the real game changer, seems to be the Atlantic.
Absolutely, the Atlantic system,
Yeah.
connecting the Americas, Europe, and Africa that was entirely new. A whole new hemisphere brought into this global network after Columbus.
And the exchange of goods was massive. What stands out?
So many things, but sugar. Sugar was huge.
It pops up constantly. Why was sugar so important?
Colonial plantations, especially in the Caribbean and Brazil, became hyper-focused on sugarcane.
Like giant sugar factories, almost.
In a way, yes. And as production ramped up, prices dropped slightly, and European demand just exploded. It went from a rare luxury to a staple. Immensely profitable.
Empowering this Atlantic trade alongside sugar was silver.
Oh, silver was the lubricant of the whole system, especially the silver pouring out of Spanish America. Mines like Potosi in Bolivia were legendary.
Mountains of silver, literally, where did it all go?
A lot flowed to Europe, helping fuel their economies. But then a massive chunk of it went east
To Asia. Why?
to buy Asian goods, silks, porcelain, spices, things Europeans desperately wanted but didn't produce. China, in particular, had a huge demand for silver. It basically became their currency.
So American silver paid for Asian goods, which were then traded perhaps back in the Americas or in Europe.
Exactly. It created this global flow. Silver mined in Bolivia could end up paying for Chinese silk sold in London or even Mexico City. It linked everything together.
An intricate web. But there's a really dark side to this Atlantic economy.
A profoundly dark side. Coerced labor.
How did that develop?
Well, initially, colonizers tried to force indigenous populations to work, especially in mines and on plantations.
But that didn't work out long term.
Largely, no. Disease wiped out huge numbers of indigenous people, and there was immense resistance. So they turned to indentured servants, mostly poor Europeans seeking passage.
But that wasn't enough either, it seems.
Not for the scale of labor demanded, especially on those sugar plantations, which led, tragically, to the rise of the transatlantic slave trade.
To forced transportation of millions of Africans.
Yes, enslaved Africans became the dominant labor force in large parts of the Americas, particularly in the Caribbean and Brazil, working under the most brutal conditions imaginable.
And this was directly linked to the profitability of things like sugar and the monopolies of those companies we talked about.
Directly. The whole system, the silver, the sugar, the chartered companies, was built on the foundation of this horrific exploitation.
Let's turn to the social consequences then. The impact of the slave trade itself, particularly back in Africa.
It was devastating. The sources highlight profound social disruption in West Africa, where most enslaved people were taken from.
What ways?
One major impact was demographic. The constant demand, especially for young men, to perform hard agricultural labor in the Americas.
Led to a severe gender imbalance in parts of West Africa.
Yes, a significant loss of the male population in many communities. This had huge ripple effects.
Affecting family structures, for instance.
Right. Some sources point to an increase in polygyny men taking multiple wives, partly as a response to the skewed ratio. Societies had to adapt under terrible strain.
And in the Americas, this forced mixing of people from different parts of Africa alongside Europeans and indigenous peoples led to new cultural forms.
Absolutely. A key example is language. Enslaved people from diverse linguistic backgrounds were thrown together.
Often deliberately mixed to prevent communication, right?
Tragically, yes.
Yeah.
But out of necessity, they developed new languages, Creole languages.
Blending elements.
Yeah, typically blending the vocabulary of the European colonizers' language, French, English, Portuguese, with grammatical structures and influences from various African languages, and sometimes indigenous ones too.
A form of cultural creation, really, born from oppression.
A testament to resilience, absolutely, but born from unimaginable circumstances.
Finally, let's touch upon belief systems. How did all this global interaction and empire building affect what people believed?
Well, the spread of religion was often intertwined with empire building. Take Spanish and Portuguese efforts in South America.
Spreading Christianity was a core goal, alongside claiming land and resources.
Very much so. For them, expanding the empire and expanding Catholicism went hand in hand. Catholic missionaries were key figures.
Acting as agents of the state, in a way, pushing not just religion but European culture and language.
Often, yes. They used tools like the printing press, when available, to spread texts. But conversion wasn't simple.
How so? Was it successful?
It was uneven and often superficial at first. Many indigenous people practiced syncretism,
Syncretism, meaning
outwardly adopting Christian practices, going to Mass, baptism, but privately, secretly, maintaining their own traditional beliefs and rituals.
and if the colonial authorities found out.
It could lead to violent responses, persecution, punishment. It was seen as heresy or backsliding.
But there were figures who pushed back against the brutality.
Yes, importantly, figures like Bartolomé de las Casas. He was a Dominican priest who witnessed the atrocities committed against indigenous people and became a vocal advocate for their rights.
Did he have much impact?
He did contribute to some legal changes, like the new laws, meant to curb the worst abuses of forced labor and enslavement of indigenous populations, though enforcement was often lacking.
So the spread of Christianity was complex, not a straightforward replacement of old beliefs.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It resulted in a blending. You see Christian saints merging with indigenous deities, local traditions weaving into Christian holidays. And we shouldn't forget the belief systems brought by enslaved Africans. Islam, various West African spiritual traditions, they also became part of the religious mix in the Americas, sometimes blending with Christianity and indigenous beliefs too.
Creating a really complex religious landscape.
Incredibly complex and dynamic, still evolving today in many ways.
So wrapping this all up, it seems clear that economic ideas like mercantilism, coupled with innovations like joint stock companies, were absolutely fundamental.
They were the engines driving European maritime expansion,
Hmm.
completely reshaping global trade between 1450 and 1750.
And the consequences were massive socially, culturally.
Especially the horrific legacy of the slave trade, but also the emergence of new cultural forms, new languages, new religious blends in the Americas.
It really was an era that forged many aspects of the world we know. Which I suppose leaves us with a question for you, the listener. Thinking about these long-lasting economic systems, the social upheavals, the cultural mixing, how do the echoes of this period, 1450 to 1750, still resonate today? What parts of our modern world, our economies, our societies, our identities, can you trace back to the strategies, the connections, and the consequences we've explored in this deep dive?
Something definitely worth reflecting on.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us.